Welcome to this explainer. Right off the bat, we're diving into an ancient Buddhist text called the Mahāsudassana Sutta. This is an epic story about unimaginable wealth, unparalleled power, and ultimately total detachment. The title literally translates to the Great Splendor, and we're about to explore exactly what happens when an ancient ruler hits the absolute peak of material success. Imagine, just for a second, that you possessed the literal power of a god. Now imagine having all the wealth in the entire world right at your fingertips. How hard would it be to just let it all go when it was time to leave it behind? Keep that question rolling around in the back of your mind because it absolutely frames this entire journey we're about to take. The text actually kicks off with a really stark, almost funny contrast. The Buddha is at the end of his life, preparing to pass away in this dusty little town called Kusinara, and his devoted disciple Ananda is actually pretty upset about it. He's begging the Buddha not to die in this little jungle hamlet, basically telling him to go pass away in a grand, wealthy city instead. But the Buddha stops him right there. He says, "Don't say that, Ananda," and then zooms way back in time to reveal that this dusty little town was actually once a prosperous golden metropolis named Kusavati. Talk about the ultimate ancient flex. Kusavati wasn't just wealthy, it was a booming capital that was never quiet. It echoed with elephants, horses, chariots, and people just joyfully feasting day and night. The city was surrounded by 7 massive ramparts made of gold, silver, beryl, crystal, ruby, emerald, basically every precious gem you can think of. But my absolute favorite detail, it had rows of magical palm trees made entirely of gems. When the wind blew through them, they sounded exactly like a perfectly tuned musical quintet. The text even notes that this music was so incredibly catchy, it ended up entertaining all the local addicts and drunkards. Now, to become the unquestioned ruler of this whole shebang and the world, King Mahāsudassana needed a sign of his mandate. Enter the wheel treasure, or Chakaratana. On a Sabbath day, this heavenly wheel featuring 1,000 spokes physically manifested right in front of him. In ancient symbolism, this wheel is a huge deal. It represents unstoppable solar power and universal dominion. So seeing this, the king sprinkles it with water and just straight up commands it to roll forth and triumph. But this heavenly wheel didn't just sit there looking pretty. It acted like a divine compass for building an empire. It literally rolled across the earth. It went east, plunging into the ocean, then moved to the south, the west, and the north. And wherever that wheel stopped, King Mahāsudassana and his massive 4-division army set up camp. As he arrives in every single corner of the earth, the opposing rulers don't even put up a fight. They immediately surrender, saying, "Welcome, Great King. We are yours. Instruct us." Okay, here is where the text gets brilliantly ironic. He conquers the entire world, right? But not with a bloody sword. Instead, his instructions to all his new vassals are deeply rooted in strict morality. He tells them, do not kill, do not steal, abstain from misconduct, stay away from liquor. And the absolute kicker here, he says, maintain the current level of taxation. He leaves their economies completely untouched. It's this total, peaceful, and highly ethical global takeover. As if conquering the world wasn't enough, the king then scores 6 mind-blowing magical treasures to solidify his absolute royal power. We're talking an all-white elephant and a horse that can physically walk through the sky. He gets a beryl jewel so ridiculously radiant that when he hoisted it up at night, the local villagers actually woke up and went to work because they thought the sun had risen. He acquires a woman treasure whose touch feels like cotton wool and whose breath smells of lotus. Plus, he gains a householder with clairvoyant vision who can spot ownerless underwater treasure and an incredibly astute commander to run the whole empire. And it wasn't just his stuff that was perfect. The guy himself was literally blessed with 4 personal traits that made him arguably the most physically and socially perfect human alive. First, surpassing beauty. Second, an incredibly long life. Third, perfect health, which the text hilariously specifies included an excellent digestive system that ran neither too hot nor too cold. And fourth, he was unconditionally beloved by his people. It says he loved them like a father, and they loved him back like children. They would literally beg his charioteer to drive slower just so they could stare at him a little bit longer. His people actually loved him so much, they tried to pile up a literal mountain of wealth just to build him a new house. The king politely declined their money, so the gods themselves stepped in. Saka, the Lord of Gods, ordered the divine architect to build the Palace of Principle. And wow, what an architectural marvel. It stretched for an entire league and featured 84,000 pillars made of gold, silver, beryl, and crystal. It had these gorgeous golden lotus ponds with jewel-toned stairs, and right there on the banks, the king set up free charities so anyone could just walk up and get food, drink, clothes, or beds. All right, brace yourselves because the sheer scale of all this wealth hinges entirely on one very specific, mathematically absurd number, 84,000. Now, in ancient Buddhist texts, this number pops up a lot. It's used to signify an almost infinite, totally overwhelming abundance. It's not just meant to be a big number. It represents a magnitude of wealth that our human minds can barely even comprehend. I mean, he didn't just have one nice chariot or one cool palace. He had 84,000 cities, 84,000 palaces, and 84,000 couches spread with fine deer hide, 84,000 elephants covered in gold netting, 84,000 chariots upholstered with lion and tiger skins. The text even mentions he had 84,000 bowls of food brought to him twice a single day. At one point, the king actually gets kind of annoyed that 84,000 elephants are crowding around him every morning and evening, so he has to order his commander to make them come in shifts every 100 years instead. But right in the middle of this completely unimaginable opulence, something really profound shifts. The king just hits pause. He asks himself, of what deed of mine is this the fruit? He realizes that this mind-boggling wealth is simply the result of his past good deeds, specifically his giving, his self-control, and his restraint. So he decides to step away from it all. He commands his mind to stop all sensual and cruel thoughts. Retreating to the chamber of the grand tower, he sits on a golden couch and just enters deep, quiet meditation. He completely lets go of physical pleasure and pain, moving into meditative states until his heart is entirely filled with boundless love, compassion, rejoicing, and equanimity for the whole world. Fast forward many thousands of years, because remember, extreme long life was one of his blessings, and eventually the king lies dying. His chief consort, Queen Subhada, suddenly realizes she hasn't seen him in forever. She dresses in yellow, gathers up the army, and goes to his chamber. Seeing him so close to death, she leans against a doorpost and just starts weeping. She frantically lists off all his massive wealth, the 84,000 cities, the palaces, the elephant, and tearfully begs him, arouse desire for these, take an interest in life. She is literally begging him to cling to his material world so he'll find the will to stay alive. But this is where we hit the emotional core of our explainer. King Mahāsudassana looks at his weeping queen and gently says that for his entire life, she has spoken agreeable words to him, but in this final hour, her words are unwelcome. Instead, he asks her to give him a totally counterintuitive command. He instructs her to say, "Sire, we must be parted and separated from all we hold dear. Don't pass away with concerns. Give up desire for these. Take no interest in life." He literally coaches her on how to help him detach from everything he owns. So through her tears, Queen Subhada actually manages to repeat those words. She lists all 84,000 of his treasures one last time and tells him to give up his desire for every single one of them. And because he didn't cling to his empire, his cities, or his unimaginable treasures, the text notes he experiences a completely painless, deeply peaceful death. The source actually compares his passing to a householder effortlessly falling asleep right after eating a really satisfying meal. He lets go entirely and is subsequently reborn in a higher realm of divinity. Then suddenly, the Buddha snaps the narrative right back to the present moment, back to that dusty little town of Kusinara with his disciple Ananda. And then, boom, he drops the ultimate plot twist. He says, "Ananda, you might think, surely King Mahāsudassana must have been someone else at that time, but you should not see it like that. I myself was King Mahāsudassana." The Buddha explains that he's actually lived and died in this exact same spot as a wheel-turning monarch multiple times. The entire massive buildup of wealth we just talked about, the palaces, the gems, the 84,000 elephants, was all just a setup for this one profound realization. Pointing to the past, the Buddha says, "See, Ananda, all those conditioned phenomena have passed, ceased, and perished." He leaves us with the ultimate truth of the text. Conditions are impermanent, their nature is to rise and fall. It tells us that even the absolute greatest, most ethical, and wealthiest empire ever assembled inevitably just fades to dust. It really shows us that true peace doesn't actually come from accumulating the world, but from our ability to let it go gracefully when the time comes. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to spark your curiosity. In a world where absolutely everything rises and falls, what 84,000 things are you refusing to let go of today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the impermanence around you.